What's up, y'all? Gonna be reacting to a segment of the Randall Carlson podcast interview on the Joe Rogan Experience and talk about the Earth. So here we go.
The configuration of
Missoula. So this is Montana?
Yeah. So here we go. This would have been showing graphically kind of the configuration of the ice at the late glacial maximum. And
so this was what time period? How many years ago?
This would have been about 16 to 20,000 years ago. And here you go. Here you can see the two ice sheets, the Cordilleran and the Laurentide. And this is the area where the ice-free corridor would have been that we were talking about. This box right here shows the area of the Missoula floods, they're called. Let's just go find us. There we go. So here, this would have been Lake Missoula, and this would have been all of the area that we were just looking at where it's eroded. All that water would have come down, flowed through the Columbia Gorge here. This Portland is right here, would have turned north, and right here at Astoria would have drained into the Pacific Ocean. There was so much water coming down here that it backed all the way up through Willamette Valley and formed a temporary body of water 400 feet deep, where Portland now is, which would have completely submerged Portland, right? So this is basic configuration. Now, there you can see this would have been the ice dam. Let's see here. So I could go back to the maps. That's the lake. So this was a very controversial over because J. Harlen Bretz, who was the geologist who first theorized this. Let's see. Here he is right here. He was considered a crackpot because he was talking about giant floods back in the 1920s and 30s. But of course he was...
I feel you, bro.
Was proven right and end up being the recipient of the Penrose Medal in his 90s.
So he was the first one to speculate?
Yeah.
And what was his reasoning? Like where did he see the evidence for some sort of a flooding?
He was doing research along the Columbia River, and he kept seeing evidence like these gigantic gravel bars and boulders and things that seemed out of place. And he actually, in fact, in 1910 is when he got interested in this, and he saw, in fact, I'll pull this up. I'll go back to Google Maps, and there was a newly released map that came out that was this feature right here. And in a minute, I'll show you some drone footage of this feature. This new topographic map came out in 1910, and he was regularly getting maps. He loved to look at maps. And he was looking at this feature, and he said, what? I'll pull this up. I'll go back to Google Maps, and there was a newly released map that came out that was this feature right here. And in a minute, I'll show you some drone footage of this feature. This new topographic map came out in 1910, and he was regularly getting maps. He loved to look at maps. And he was looking at this feature, and he said, what the hell is the explanation for this? And this is what started him on this quest, this thing right here. It's called Potholes Cataract. And Potholes Cataract is a giant erosional feature in the basalt, the edge of the basalt plateau. And the water came from the right, and what you have here, we'll zoom in. You see this kind of round hole right here?
Yes.
That round pool? That is a result of what's called colking. This is colking. When the water gets so turbulent that it's doing this, like a tornado. And it literally can drill into the rock in a matter of days. It can drill. And what you see here is the evidence of gigantic turbulence. And this is called a recessional cataract. So as the water pours over this, picture you've got the rock. Okay, so the water is pouring over it. And as it pours over, it's eroding the wall of the cataract back. So it's receding. And then it's going to keep receding until there's no more water. And at the time the flood spigots are turned off, you're now left with this fossil feature.
Is there a geological formation, like a style of, like, what you're calling it, colking? Is that what you're saying?
Kolking.
Is there something that it does to the walls of that particular lake that make it evident that it was done that way? Like, does it leave like almost like a water drill? Like, drill would leave markings?
The holes drilled into rock.
Oh.
That's the evidence. And yeah, and I mean, we can see turbulence in modern water flows. But the thing is, to do something like this, you have to have extremely deep, extremely fast-moving turbulent water and sustained for maybe in this case a few weeks.
So a few weeks made that lake just by water spinning? Oh yeah,
a few weeks made this whole feature right here. And what you have is you have two alcoves. Here's the north alcove and the south alcove, separated by what's called a rock blade. And that rock blade, if that water had continued to pour over for another few days, that rock blade would have been gone.
Okay, so that's interesting. It basically indicates that this was a rapid, spontaneous formation, which I concur. But the thing is, this is what he's focusing on. All relating to the younger Dryas. I don't know, do I like this mode? Oh my god, it's significantly better in dark mode. It's so much better. So, because the thing is, like, he's focused on, and where was it, right here? Talking about a lake that was formed there. I want to point out, this was a lake. There's so many places that were lakes. And if we look around on a larger scale, so what's being missed in this conversation, let me just jump in, is what happened to cause all this was not an impact. It was not some sort of glacial melts. It was actually the Earth expanded because what was going on is the sequence of planets is that Earth used to be like Venus, and then the planet that is Venus was like Mercury, and that planet, planetary supervolcanoed. So the whole planet exploded in a supernova of a planet, and it then swept across Earth. And Earth then was moved from the second orbital position out to the third. And as a result of that, it was no longer in the same ethereal environment. And so as a result of an imbalance with the environment, it began to rotate. Like Venus, it wasn't rotating in the past. It was at an equilibrium. And so then it began to rotate when it was moved to a new orbital position. And what then occurred was the planet that was Earth, that was like Venus, that did not have a magnetic field, began to produce a magnetic field because it was rotating, which then pulls ethereal particles into a figure-8 orbital, physically through the planet, down into it, past and through it, and out the other side, but then are gravitationally locked, flowing in an orbit due to rotation leading to like an imbalance that then leads to certain particles that are in certain conditions being locked in a gravitational orbit. And so then they collide at the center of the planet at times. And what happens is the planet that was Earth, that was like Venus, that was a single crust, began to produce material within the planet that built up pressure inside of the planet. And not just material, but water and other lower molecular weight particles, especially in mass, because it was colliding these particles of ethereal in such quantity that macroscopic atoms were produced. It doesn't take a sun, it just takes collision of enough particles in a magnetic field. And so then the pressure built up until finally one day, which he refers to as the general time frame of the Younger Dryas period, one day the Earth expanded. It literally fractured. Let's see if we can see this. It fractured specifically in the Pacific Ocean, is where like the epicenter was, as we can see. See the Pacific Ocean? Where's land? All the land got shoved away from the epicenter, and it all got concentrated on like the other half of the planet. And if we look around the Pacific, there's literal waves. Here, for instance, a shock wave went through this region, separating Antarctica and South America, and then creating an island arc. This didn't just casually happen. This happened, boom. It was like done, relatively speaking. And it wasn't just this going on. This wasn't the only thing going on. Like if we go back to terrain, let's zoom out. Let's go over to the Himalayas. The Himalayas, as we can see, water flowed this way, probably from the Pacific, where the earth ruptured and water gushed from the innards of the earth, and melt pulse 1A and 1B, or whatever, the things Randall Carlson mentions as pulses, probably are pulses. But water flowed in this direction and literally piled up debris to the point where it made mountains, but the mountains could not sustain the pressure, and then it literally burst through this region here. And also it went around into Iran, so the flow literally creates another arc here and through. So the flow initially was just literally across this whole region out into the Atlantic Ocean, but then it produced lakes that are gone, huge lakes, clearly huge lakes that are just gone in the Tibetan plateau. I mean, this was a lake. That's why this exists. And if we look around, when the earth ruptured, so like basically the process was the earth was smaller, and then it began, it was so spontaneous that it was essentially in the period of probably months. So not like instantly larger. So what happened was it began to grow rapidly. But then the water didn't have an ocean floor yet because it was still being formed, because that's what happened, was when it expanded, the ocean floors were all formed. And it didn't have an ocean floor, so the water literally swept across the continents. And then as it was expanding, it formed like a coastal region. But then the coastal region was no longer the coastal region after a period. But in the process, the coastal region was very turbulently being formed. I mean, we even see these rolling hills from where water formed this whole region, just along the entire western coast. Water just shoved the material of Chile into Bolivia and over into wherever this is. Argentina, maybe? I don't even know, pardon me, guys. But literally just shoved it over from the wave of the sudden rupturing of the earth, and literally produced these mountains, produced an entire mountain chain along the western coast of North and South America, all the way up the coast, even producing in North America especially a significantly like previous coast when this region was under the influence of tidal water shaping it, while like the eastern United States was drained away. There's so much I would say. Another arc, all the island arcs. Also there's Japan. Maybe satellite might be better for some of this. Like the Mariana Trench is literally, here's a shadow of essentially a wave of energy colliding with the continental shelf that's more sturdy, and then literally bouncing off and coming back, and this wave literally forming this like arc underwater, but in the process leaving like a stamp of its motion where it once was. I mean, this does not happen slow and steady. Even Cape Verde. Canary Islands. Likely formed in the process, so I don't... Randall Carlson mentions the potential of Atlantis being in the Azores Islands region, like underwater. Let's pull up the ocean. This map is pretty much demonstrable of that which did not exist prior to the Earth expanding. So when the Earth expanded, the Earth essentially radioactively decayed. And in the process of its decay, it released a lot of energy. And as a result, there's evidence of radioactive decay that is billions of years in history. Oh yeah. Because we're basing it off of today's decay rate when the system is actually now having expanded, it's now like vented, and so now it's essentially at an equilibrium, and so it's not having those same processes occur. Don't quite remember what I was saying, but when it comes to Atlantis, see that this whole region, it just simply, if we're looking for Atlantis, it must be, and this is the critical missing link to any like search for Atlantis, is it must be based on Earth prior to expansion. And so if we're looking any of these places, this is all new. Anything that's not continental shelf is post-expansion. It's that simple. The center along the mid-Atlantic ridge fault line where the earth fractured between the continents and magma just pushed it apart, creating literally the ocean floor in the process. There were no islands there at the time. This stuff likely formed in the sweeping of debris off of the continents as there was a flow of water across all of Asia and Africa and into the Atlantic Ocean, which then formed islands in the process. Maybe this was formed when the Atlantic Ocean was not as spread yet, and so when it was dropping debris, it was actually with the fault line much closer, and then the North America much closer, so there's only a small region, but then it pushes outward. So it's just simply put, it cannot be Atlantis if it's not continental shelf. And I would point anyone actually interested in finding Atlantis to Flemish Cap here, because pre-Earth expansion, it was there at the Strait of Gibraltar. It literally is a continental shelf region that has the shape of an island. Surrounding it, there is a potential of it having been an island. It's continental shelf, really critical. It's real critical. I know Earth expansion and all, maybe crazy talk, maybe facts, you never know. We can look around. Here's another arc formed. I mean, literally Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, and Honduras just fractured. Shockwave, just psh, Cuba and Dominican Republic. This was all continental shelf that this part just disintegrated. Just disintegrated. Maybe this is where the Earth fractured, but then the Mexico was actually down like here, like, because that essentially wrapped around, and all of this region was actually down here. I mean, maybe that is where it fractured, literally. The epicenter. I mean, that is crazy spot right there. Like, what is going on? There's no other location on Earth that I've seen that looks like a fucking mouth that was just gaped open by Like, that didn't happen here. It's really, everywhere else is much more smooth because it was formed by a literal crack that went through the planet, just all through it. But there was somewhere it started. I was not so just I was like the epicenter, and I really do have some suspicion that it's related to Chicxulub, which we consider to be a meteor impact. But we also understand that the Deccan traps went off simultaneously and appear as if they may have been literally linked. And I wonder if it's because the Earth fractured at maybe its poles, and there's a gravitational anomaly south of India that looks like it was a pole. This thing. Like, what the fuck is this? Can I go? Well, here. It's literally an opening that looks like it was kind of down and in. And blue being a lower gravity. Like, there's just not mass there. Like, it was an opening and it filled in. You know, you have like a hole in dirt, you just fill some shit in. But it used to be a fucking gaping hole, because that's what happens at the poles, is there literal flows of particles that go into the pole and carves like a waterfall, just carves an opening into the pole and out of the pole, to the point where there's openings in celestial objects carved by flows of particles that are the most present at the poles. Like, they'll flow in here, but they're really, where they're concentrating is at the poles, and then especially at the center. And then they disperse as they flow back away from the center, and then they remerge. And as they remerge, they become more and more concentrated, going through the poles, to the point where it's literally a river of flow of particles carving, like water, a pole. But then the Earth expanded and it got rearranged. The shit that was once the poles are not at the poles anymore. And maybe it was India was at a pole. Right about there was a pole. I mean, it's not continental shelf, so it's a little unclear. What else? Okay. I just ultimately, I didn't want to do a huge long reaction to this. I did start one. I did about half of it, and I realized it's trash. I should probably not use this mic, especially me. I don't talk very loud. I need conditions to be just so. And this mic is kind of lazy. I like it because it just, boom. And I don't have to have an arm somewhere where I don't really have room for it, but it's probably not as good. So, hopefully this one recorded better. That's kind of my 2 cents on it. Ultimately, I mean, all this stuff about Younger Dryas, what the critical thing is the Earth expanded. And that's what we're missing in there. And pre-Earth expansion, I mean, all these years, all these layers and layers and layers were formed in the flood, and then radioactive decay, which was occurring as the Earth decayed, essentially slowed down to today's rate, because it does matter. Like under high pressure, the way a decay works is if a system is under high pressure and then it moves out and it's under low pressure, well, guess what? It was exerting a pressure, and if it was at an equilibrium with the pressure inward, then it was in balance. But when it's out into this like low energy environment, it literally decays because its pressure is not in balance anymore. So it pushes out, and if it's pushing out too much, it literally decays, which is like a supernova of a planet or of an atom, are all the same mechanisms across the infinite spectrum of reality, seen differently. It's just, in all instances, we use atoms to see everything. But if we're composed of another particle in the infinite array of particles, then we see based on that particle and its relative mass ratio to other particles. So if it has the same relative mass ratio of the observer's particle to a star, or of our atoms to a star, is the same ratio of their particles to an atom, then they will see that atom as a star, and all of reality will be shifted in that way. And that's how infinity works. in a way. Decay, though, is very important. Like, we literally understand scientifically that decay, radioactive decay, is not constant. It's known to be seasonally dependent. And the thing is what's happening is it's literally just that, a matter of the ethereal environmental pressure inward as a function of, or like a balance between the inward pressure and the outward pressure of a particle, because any particle is going to have a mass and it's going to be pushing outward at a certain pressure. And if it's essentially moved to an environment where it was once at an equilibrium, it won't be anymore. It just won't be. And that's what happened with Earth. It got moved to a new position, then it had to rotate. Oh no, the system's out of balance, so it starts rotating, and that's how it comes to balance. Then it also has the moon to produce an actual balance energetically in ways that are beyond just like orbitals, that are really touching on actual energetic balances happening, where a system is out of balance with its environment, and to become in balance with its environment, it reacts with another system. So the two become essentially one unified system. And then equilibrium can occur once more, in a way, even though the system remains itself out of balance. It's in an equilibrium as a whole, and so it's stable. Maybe a life lesson to all those peeps like myself. Unstable, fucking fluorine atoms floating around, all reactive as fuck. Like, what up? What up, girl? Alright, that's all I gotta say. I do recommend this podcast as a whole. I am still listening to it. It just was kind of getting me going. Maybe I'll continue, but if not, peace out. Appreciate y'all.